I'm a couple months late, but I still want to briefly review every new roguelite and roguelike that I played in 2022. As always, these are mostly new games, but I also included some older games that I discovered for the first time this past year. Links to all of these games are included in the description. So let's get into it. Pawnbarian is the first new game that I played this year. It's a chess-based puzzle roguelite with turn-based gameplay. You can now play as 6 different heroes or classes, and your goal is to clear the board of enemies while taking as little damage as possible. You control each character with a deck of moves, most of which are modeled after chess pieces, like a pawn moveset or a knight moveset, for example. But there are a couple characters, like the Shogun, that have very different movesets that are not based on chess pieces. Between runs, you can upgrade your cards or pieces, and you can climb difficulty or ascension levels between runs as well. At its core, Pawnbarian is a fairly simple game, but it has a fun, tight gameplay loop. I did enjoy my time with it and just playing around with different characters, learning different areas and enemies, and solving that puzzle-like nature of the game. But that puzzle-like nature also limits how much I wanted to play this game because it feels less and less interesting once you've more or less solved the game, so to speak. So overall, it's a good randomized puzzle game, but that limited replayability holds it back. Rogue Tower took one of my favorite genres, which are tower defense games, and added a roguelite twist to it. In this game, you slowly unveil and unravel a grid-based randomized map that spawns new waves of enemies for every tile you unlock. Once you unlock them, you can choose new towers and power-ups after each wave, and you place these towers to defend your base, which is standard tower defense gameplay. There are 3 main health types, and there are different towers and condition effects that counter those specific health types, leading to some interesting choices you have to make to counter all enemy types that come to attack you. I quite like this attack type balance, and the tower variety is also fun to play around with. One important thing to note is that Rogue Tower has very heavy-handed vertical progression, or run-to-run unlocks that make you more powerful. For example, I think it's literally impossible to win on your first run. You need to unlock more tower variety and additional unlocks before you have an actual fair chance at winning. You do unlock things pretty quickly, but it also makes the first couple runs in the game feel kind of wasted because you don't really have any real chance of winning. As a whole, I feel similar to Rogue Tower as I do to Pawnbarian. It's a fun and novel fusion of roguelite elements with tower defense gameplay, and I generally like those tower defense elements that are present. But I think it's probably better as a tower defense game than as a roguelite. And once you can clear runs pretty consistently, the flaws of that gameplay really start to limit the replayability. Still, I would recommend it for those interested in that unique tower defense roguelite fusion. Next, Vaults of the Void takes familiar roguelite deck builder elements and adds some great twists to them. The core combat and gameplay will feel familiar to you if you've ever played card game roguelites like Slay the Spire. You play cards from your deck that cost energy points and use them to defeat small teams of enemies. And these cards are a mix of damaging cards, defending cards, and cards with other unique modifiers or condition effects. Of course, there are also different characters with their own decks, combos, and playstyles. But Vault also adds some novel gameplay elements as well. For example, you can freely customize your deck by storing unwanted cards in a side deck that can be swapped in and out of your main deck between rounds or fights. Additionally, there are also a lot of smaller gameplay changes, like changes to how block stacks traditionally work in card game roguelites, giving you access to an active ability, and things like that. These all combine together to create a roguelite card game that feels fresh and enjoyable to play, even as somebody who has played quite a few roguelite card games over the years. Because of that, Vaults of the Void is my favorite deck builder roguelite that I played this year. Now let's talk about Otherworld Legends. It was originally a mobile game, and it got ported to Steam this past year. This game is a fast-paced action roguelite where you clear small rooms of enemies before reaching satisfying boss fights. You can play as a large number of characters with meaningfully different mechanics, and the game has a lot of cross-run progression and unlocks, as well as online co-op. I actually quite liked the core gameplay loop of Otherworld Legends. It's simple and it's spammy, but it was also just plain fun, and I actually loved the different boss fights that were present. But sadly, this game has a couple of fatal flaws that just ruined it for me. First, this game unfortunately keeps its mobile game monetization with moderate pay to win and DLC galore. I could maybe overlook this, but there was also a big gameplay flaw for me. Without explaining all of the details, the way armor regeneration worked, you had to wait a minute between rooms in order to heal back up, or To keep the gameplay flowing and keep actually playing the game, you had to enter the next room at a health disadvantage, neither of which were fun to me. So for those two reasons, that gameplay frustration and that mobile game monetization, I just can't recommend this game without some changes. Next, Gordian Quest is a novel, tactical, RPG, deck builder, card game roguelite fusion. You play as a team of 3 characters, each of whom have their own card decks, equipment loadouts, and trait trees. You move your characters around a small grid in order to play cards and defeat enemies, as well as dodging attacks, and that all adds a nice tactical element to the game. Gordian Quest also has several different game modes, including a longer campaign mode and a more traditional roguelite mode. Honestly, this game just does so many different things and has so many different mechanics. Sometimes this can be really cool, and it can allow for incredibly deep build crafting and fine-tuning of combos and synergies. I quite like the variety of class playstyles as well in the game, and I enjoyed crafting a team around those different characters. Other times though, it can feel like system overload, with some of these systems feeling unnecessary and cumbersome to play around with. I felt like I was still discovering new game systems 20 plus hours in that I didn't realize existed, and I don't think all these systems really added to the gameplay experience. As a whole, I liked Gordian Quest, and I would recommend it if you're looking for a deck builder roguelite that adds some more RPG and tactical elements. The deep build crafting can be incredibly enjoyable, but at the same time, all that extra stuff going on prevented Gordian Quest from ranking higher up on my list. Roguelike 2 is a 2D platformer roguelite with some Metroidvania elements and a heavy focus on vertical progression. Your goal is to clear each area of the game and defeat their respective bosses before unlocking and defeating the final true boss. This game is very much about cross-run progression and goals. Getting a lot of upgrades is necessary for most players to complete later areas. And once you clear a boss, it stays defeated until you start a new game plus, similar to games like Undermine. There are a mix of variety upgrades, like unlocking new characters that have different attacks and special abilities, as well as different strict upgrades, like increased hit points or increased damage dealt. This game takes a lot of inspiration and gameplay ideas from its predecessor, but it expands and improves upon them. I bounced off of Rogue Legacy 1 pretty quickly, but the sequel definitely grabbed me. I liked the class variety, and I also liked how the enemies of future areas were more powerful iterations of the enemies in earlier areas. Despite the game being focused on vertical progression or cross-run upgrades, Rogue Legacy 2 also mostly avoided feeling grindy. That said, there were still 1 or 2 frustration points, which made me put the game down for a little bit because I felt my progression was plateauing. I go back and forth a little bit on Rogue Legacy 2. As a whole, I enjoyed my playthrough, but I'll probably never do a new game plus. Ultimately, I think Rogue Legacy 2 is a good vertical progression focused 2D platformer. If you want those things, if that sounds appealing to you, definitely check it out. But if that idea is off-putting to you, you should skip Rogue Legacy 2 because it probably won't surprise you with what it does. Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon is a spin-off of the beloved Shovel Knight series. The core gameplay takes match 3 gameplay, similar to Candy Crush or Bejeweled, and adds a roguelite and mild RPG spin to it. Instead of controlling the whole board at once, you control a single character that you use to attack tiles, which will destroy all connecting tiles that match. And that's that match 3 element, inspiration. A lot of the depth in this game comes from the different tile variety and its different special effects, the different characters you can use with the different passive effects, as well as the different items you can find along each run and how they interact with the tiles and characters. Honestly, I did originally dismiss this game as a cheap mobile game, but it's actually a full-fledged game. I like the character variety, I like the enemy variety, and it was a great take on that older match 3 style of gameplay with more planning and strategy than I expected. At the same time though, this game suffers some from replayability. Once I beat the game a couple times, I felt like I'd pretty much done all that I wanted to do with the game. There are a couple secrets to discover past your first few clears, but it's just not that much overall. I haven't actually tried the free DLC though, so maybe that's improved some things replayability wise. Dome Keeper has a simple core gameplay loop. You venture into a mine to hunt for resources to give you upgrades and relics to give you new power-ups. Then, at set intervals, you return to your dome and defend it from increasingly powerful waves of enemies. Along each run, you upgrade your miner and your defenses, which improve and deepen each of these gameplay loops, and you can also collect unique power-ups from the relics that give you additional abilities, like the teleporter relic that allows you to, as you might expect, teleport deeper into the mine and back to your base. I talked about the demo for this game this past summer as part of my Steam Next Fest video. In my opinion, this game has only improved since then. I think Domekeeper really gets the core idea of what makes a roguelite fun. It's a simple gameplay loop, but it's very addicting, and the upgrades and relics along the way meaningfully change how each run plays out. Additionally, the cross-run upgrades add some great gameplay variety, like an alternative miner and an alternative defense stone. Of course, there are still some flaws, like one of the two characters feeling bad to play, and also how after a while you do reach some limits with that gameplay loop. I just really want to see some more content added to this game. Still, it's one of my standout roguelites for the year. Arcanium is a party-based deck builder roguelite where you set out to defend your world from an incoming evil force and its corrupted minions. You control a team of 3 heroes, each of whom have their own decks, energy, relic slots, and ultimate abilities. Unlike a more traditional card game roguelite that sets you on a fairly limited branching path, Arcanium lets you explore a 3-biome overworld at your own pace in a turn-based like fashion. And it allows you to choose between fighting normal enemies, elite enemies, or mini-bosses, choosing to stop by a shop, or choosing to pick up more cards, things like that. You have a lot of flexibility over how each run turns out. The shining quality of Arcanium for me is the hero variety and team mechanics. There are 16 different heroes with different playstyles, synergies, and you can combo heroes together in pretty fun ways. Like when I comboed 2 different minion master heroes together to create one super busted team. In terms of flaws of Arcanium, ironically, I think the enemy variety is one thing holding it back. And it also suffers from UI problems here and there. But more broadly and deeply, I think the game is missing some X factor, or that something special to make it really stand out. It does most things well, or at least well enough, but doesn't do any one thing to make it really shine and stand out. Because of that, I think Arcanium is a good roguelite deck builder that card game fans will enjoy. But I wouldn't recommend it over any of the greats in the genre unless you want something more specific, like that team element and those synergies. Call to the Lamb is a unique roguelite that fuses more standard action roguelite combat with basic city builder or management sim gameplay. The action roguelite combat has a simple mix of a standard weapon, a secondary spell, and a dodge roll. The management sim side revolves around managing your cult of followers and allows for demonic rituals and follower sacrifices, things like that. There are also some nice interlocking progression and unlock systems. I quite enjoyed playing Call to the Lamb. I think the story elements and art style brought the game together quite nicely to make it an enjoyable overall experience. I like the combat, the management sim elements, and the side content as I played through it. But this game also has a pretty fatal flaw of lacking any depth for basically every gameplay element present. The combat is simple, the build crafting is simple, the management sim is simple, it's all pretty simple. So while I enjoyed playing through this game, it also doesn't offer that much playtime, relatively speaking. And it's just not a game with a super high skill ceiling or super crazy combos. It's a fun indie game and overall experience, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a great roguelite specifically. One Step from Eden is an incredibly unique action deck builder roguelite. In real time, you move around a grid and use your cards to damage enemies. Positioning and quick movement is incredibly important in order to dodge attacks and actually hit your abilities. Between fights, you build up your deck by selecting more cards, passive traits, as well as other perks and skills. This game is a pretty steep learning curve, and I started so bad at this game. I think this is partially because of how unique the gameplay is, and partially because there are a lot of things the game doesn't tell you directly. For example, you can't see what your cards do mid-fight. You have to remember them. And you'll also get severely punished when you first encounter certain enemies and bosses before you learn their movesets and abilities. But once I started to get past that initial learning curve and started being halfway decent at the game, it became incredibly fun. The active dodging and aiming and selecting the right cards for each moment was incredibly fun. The different characters and playstyles also felt rewarding to experiment with. This game is incredibly unique and doesn't feel like a lot of other roguelites. I'm excited to play more of this game in the future and hopefully put out a full-length review on it. In Vampire Survivors, you attack a constant stream of enemies swarming you from all sides. As enemies die, they drop a resource you can collect to level up and select new upgrades and relics for your character. With a couple small exceptions for directional aiming, every ability auto-fires on its own, which makes the main focus of this game on your movement and, more importantly, the combos you create from the relics and upgrades you find. It's a pretty simple gameplay loop, but the game also has a shocking amount of synergies and build crafting combos, as well as myriad cross-run upgrades and unlocks, new items, and characters for you to try on future runs. If you haven't heard of Vampire Survivors, you probably haven't followed roguelites or indie games that closely in the past year. This game has spawned, or at least popularized, a whole new subgenre of games called bullet heavens or survivor likes. Additionally, so many even mainstream gaming channels and outlets have loved this game and given it a lot of praise. I'm gonna be honest and say, I think this game is fine. I got my couple dollars worth, but I also got bored of this game pretty quickly. I wish I loved this game more than I do. This game theoretically has a lot of qualities that I should enjoy, but I just don't find the core gameplay loop engaging enough, even as second monitor content, because you control so little about what's going on in the game moment to moment. And for that reason, I just didn't want to keep playing this game, and I also haven't wanted to try other bullet heaven games as well. Ziggurat II is a magic-based, first-person arena shooter. Gameplay consists of clearing rooms of enemies, completing side objectives and bosses, and creating combos with different weapons you find, as well as different traits you get from leveling up in each run. You play as many different characters, each of whom have different stats, passive abilities, and active abilities. Ziggurat II is a classic progression-focused roguelite, where your goal is to unlock new items, level up your characters, and complete stories and goals across a series of missions or runs. Ziggurat II draws a lot on its predecessor. Honestly, I didn't enjoy the first Ziggurat that much, but I actually quite liked Ziggurat II. The combat is fast-paced and fun. The weapon variety is nice, and the different characters and different active abilities they have really spice up the game run to run. The game can get a little repetitive since much of the gameplay involves running in circles while attacking enemies in the middle, and the game does feel a little bit grindy because of that cross-run progression focus. Because of those things, I never actually finished this game, but I do plan to go back eventually. Despite those flaws, its gameplay is just good, simple fun. Revita is a platformer shooter with the defining quality of using your health as a currency. In each area, you clear a series of small rooms of enemies, and each area culminates in a final boss fight. Along the way, you'll encounter various merchants, chests, and shrines that allow you to buy more upgrades and relics with your health. To counteract that health cost, you can also replenish your health a small amount after you kill enough enemies. I've only played about 5 or 6 hours Revita, but the core gameplay is nice, and you can create some fun combos as you stack relics in a given run. I also like the core principle of Revita and how much the game focuses on a series of important risk-reward choices and mechanics. Do I take this relic and risk dying at the next boss, or do I save my health for the next fight? It feels great to take a risk, create a powerful synergy, and have it all pay off. I do have some concerns about this game though. Gameplay-wise, I haven't really been enjoying the boss fights that much. On a more fundamental level, this game allows you to create fun combos when you're doing well. But basically all relics and power-ups you find in a given run are locked behind spending your health to get them. So if you're bad at this game and have no health to spend, you're kind of punished twice. Both for not getting as far, but also being unable to create said fun combos that make the game worth playing. They're planning a major rework of this game as a 2.0 release in the future, so I'm planning to try this game more then. For now, my opinion of Revita is overall positive, with some mixed elements or hesitations. Now let's talk about a couple early access games. For all of these early access games, I didn't necessarily play the latest version, so keep that in mind as these games are constantly changing. Let's start with Have a Nice Death, which is a fun hack-and-slash platformer roguelite. You play as Death and set out to fix the mess created by your negligent employees. You have a basic attack, as well as 2 special abilities you can use on a cooldown. You play through a series of floors, and each floor has different levels, bosses, and mini-bosses for you to fight. The game also has standard build crafting elements, as well as entertaining NPCs and basic story elements. There are a lot of things I really love about this game. The overall aesthetic is superb, and a lot of the bosses are incredibly fun. It's definitely a harder roguelite, but it's fun to learn and master. I also liked the progression system and the way that it mixes achievement and currency-based unlocks. But there are also a lot of mechanics here and there that I didn't enjoy. I know some of these have been addressed with updates, like adding an alternative basic attack now, but some other problems still persist, like the awkward and janky healing system in the game. It's because of these small annoyances that I put the game down, but I'm also super excited to see how this game plays at its full release. Editing insert here. So this game actually just released yesterday as of editing this video, but I procrastinated enough on this video, so I'm not going to re-record it. As of right now, Have a Nice Death is in its 1.0 full release, but that quick review was for their early access version. Peglin was one of the unexpected gems that I stumbled across this year. This game combines Peggle or pachinko board elements with RPG and roguelite elements. You collect and curate a set of orbs during your run, and you use these orbs to clear a board of pegs. Clearing pegs allows you to damage enemies that are marching towards your character above the board, and you deal more damage to these enemies as you hit more pegs, as well as depending on which orb you use. There are different special effects for different orbs, relics you can find that modify your orbs, different peg types, and different map hazards, all of which combined add some good variety and surprising gameplay depth. Overall, I love Peglin for its simultaneous, simple, and easy to pick up gameplay combined with surprisingly good and deep build crafting. I enjoy regular Peggle as well, and I also enjoyed this evolution of it. I would say my biggest problem with Peglin is balance and variety related. It feels like the game has a somewhat limited meta of what builds are best, and that's something I've seen improve with more and more early access updates, but it could still use a little work. I hope that concern is fully addressed with the final release, but I still absolutely think this game is worth picking up as it is right now. Next, The Void Reigns Upon Her Heart is a unique roguelite boss rush shoot 'em up. The core game mode of Void is the story mode, where you play as one of 4 characters and clear 9 regular bosses before clearing a final special boss on each run. After each fight, you collect various upgrades that make you more powerful, but you can create some super fun synergies and combos as well. There is some great boss variety, but at the same time, each boss feels incredibly fair and learnable, which is good, because the game very quickly becomes an extreme bullet hell. There is also an alternative game mode that lets you fight each boss individually for a non-roguelite shoot-'em-up experience. Honestly, Void was my pleasant surprise of the year. I started playing a couple months ago when I got my Steam Deck, and it's the perfect Steam Deck game for short sessions because each run is around 10 minutes long. The game checks so many positive boxes. Fun core gameplay, good variety, good build crafting, rewards for performing better, high skill ceiling, etc., etc. The only real negative I have with this game are some more minor mechanics, and I'm sure the story will be divisive among different people. But I would definitely recommend checking this game out, even during its early access period. Just look at these Steam reviews that are at 100% positive. Ember Knights is the final full game that I'll talk about. It's a hack and slash roguelite with a charming pixel art style. There are currently 4 areas in the game to clear, each of which have different mini bosses and one main final boss. You can play as 5 different classes or weapons, and you can modify each class with different traits later on once you've unlocked them. In addition to your main weapon, you also collect 2 spells to use in each run, along with various traits and stat modifiers that you stack together to create your build. It's also worth noting that Ember Knights has both online and local co-op, which is pretty rare to find these days. I was actually really excited to try this game before release, but then I just didn't play it for a long time. I'm disappointed that I waited so long to try this game because the game is a lot of fun. The core gameplay is nothing complex or super innovative, but it feels responsive and just fun to play. The different classes are truly unique playstyles, with some great trade-offs that lend themselves to co-op play. There's also the ability to create really great combos that feel incredibly powerful and like you're breaking the game in some capacity. My main complaints with Ember Knight center around a need for more content. I completed my first run in only 4 or 5 hours, but there's no scaling difficulty or anything like that. And while there's a decent number of upgrades and traits They mostly fit a couple different niches or build styles. There's definitely room for more growth in terms of play styles and build variety. That being said, I'm really excited to keep playing this one, and I'm really excited to see where it ends up for its full 1.0 release. The core combat and gameplay is just incredibly fun. I'll close this video with one DLC review. Risk of Rain 2 released a DLC called Survivors of the Void. This DLC added 2 new characters, a new game mode, and some smaller odds and ends like new maps and enemy types. One new character focuses on precision, sniping, and risk-reward gameplay. The second new character is a brawler that likes to get into the middle of fights. It requires careful management of its corruption meter, which allows you to transform between a standard moveset and a more powerful form. I liked both of these new characters a lot. I think they add some new gameplay niches to Risk of Rain 2. The new game mode is a wave-based survival mode, and I actually quite liked it as well. I don't think it has the same depth as the main game mode, but it does avoid some potential annoyances with the main game mode, like the pressure of the timer and how level scaling works. Because of that, I think the new game mode can be especially noob-friendly. So altogether, Survivors of the Void is a great DLC for the game. If you like the base game of Risk of Rain 2, the DLC will add more variety and more fun playtime. At the same time, if you're not a fan of the base game, I don't think this DLC is going to do much to change your opinion. Before I finish this video, I do want to note that I have longer reviews for a lot of these games that I mention in this video. I also received some free copies of some of these games that I talked about in this video, and I'll show lists of those on screen now, as well as in the description. So now for my favorite games of the year. Vault of the Void was my favorite deck builder this year. It just felt so fun to play, and it felt fresh in the deck building genre. The Void Reigns Upon Her Heart was my biggest surprise and favorite non-turn-based roguelite of the year. I absolutely love this game a lot more than I expected, and it's one of my favorite roguelites to play on my Steam Deck. The next tier down, there are a couple games that do some things I really love, but also generally just need more content. Here, I'd list Domekeeper, Peglin, and Ember Knights. Domekeeper takes a simple concept and executes it well. It's just fun and relaxing to play through it, mining and defending that base. Similarly, Peglin has a great Peggle RPG gameplay loop that always hooks me. And Ember Knights has some of the cleanest action roguelike gameplay that I've seen in a while. But again, all three of these just need some more content in some areas to push them over the top. Thanks to everyone for watching this video, and special thanks to the channel members for helping support the channel. Please like this video to help me out in the algorithm, and thanks for watching.